In 4 days, President-elect Bola Ahmed Tinubu will take the oath of office as Nigeria's 16th president, and it's the 7th inauguration in our country's 4th republic. We're counting down to May 29 Inauguration Day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the program. Remember that you can join the conversation right now and share your thoughts on Twitter if you use the hashtag countdown to May 29. Remember to mention at TVC News NG and at Nifemi Oguntoye. Today, President Muhammadu Buhari presided over the last Federal Executive Council meeting in Valedictory. Ministers and members of the Federal Executive Council arrived at the presidential villa in Abuja. One of the remaining tasks performed at the last weekly Federal Executive Council meeting was the swearing-in of the Federal Commissioners of the Revenue, Mobilization and Fiscal Allocation Commission. President Buhari administered the oath of office on 7 new federal commissioners. Also, Vice President Yemi Osinbajo presented the health reform report and draft bill, which the federal government says is a comprehensive roadmap towards universal health care in Nigeria.
The much-needed opportunity to set Nigeria on the path to universal health coverage. The committee is mindful that investing in health will enable our country to unlock its immense potentials and ensure that all Nigerians, regardless of their social status, can access quality health services. However, we also realize that this will require structural reforms, hence the intentional effort to cover the poor and ensure the mobilization of large amounts of private investment. One of the first insights that confronted the committee was how the structure of our federation unwittingly contributes to poor health outcomes.
Let's get more about what transpired earlier. Senior correspondent Femi Akonde joins me now for updates. Femi, they say everything that has a beginning has an ending. Walk us through some of the highlights of today's valedictory session.
Yes, indeed, everything with a beginning has an ending, Ifemi. But for President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, the plot of that administration has a beginning, a middle, and an ending. Of course, some will say it had a very slow start, a slow beginning, because it took Mr. President about 6 months before he could set up his federal cabinet, that is the Federal Executive Council. And then it had a very turbulent middle, looking at the COVID-19 pandemic that ravaged countries around the world, and indeed Nigeria had its fair share. Nigeria's economy was also badly hit, security challenges, and so much to grapple with. And well, the ending for President Muhammadu Buhari is relative. Some people say it is a relatively smooth ending for Mr. President. But members of the Federal Executive Council are giving themselves a pat on the back. They say indeed they have been able to successfully carry out the assignment for which they were appointed. Well, it was a time of valediction. Everyone had something good to say about President Muhammadu Buhari working with Mr. President under his supervision. They say that Mr. President gives them all a free hand. He hardly interferes in the responsibilities assigned to them. This, they say, is to the credit of his style of leadership, and they say it has also enhanced the kind of performance that some of these ministries have been able to record within the period of 8 years. And for some of these ministers, they have been members of the Federal Executive Council for 8 years. You know, there was no significant cabinet reshuffle that President Muhammadu Buhari did through the course of his 2-term tenure as president. Of course, he did some minor movements here and there. He did let some people go, but there was no major shake-up of the cabinet. So it's been the same team, relatively the same team from the beginning up to this very time. So, you know, the bond among these ministers have grown very strong over the years. So it was really interesting for them to see, for us to see them, you know, reminisce on all of the memories that they have as members of the Federal Executive Council, talk about the tough times, the trials, the successes of the administration, and of course, what the future holds for them, Nifemi.
Well, with the new administration, we expect a significant shake in the cabinet with new names and new members, indeed, as it were. Well, the cabinet was expected to be officially dissolved today. Ministers were expected to hand over to their permanent secretaries in their respective ministries. Did that happen?
Well, that did not happen. President Muhammad Buhari instructed or directed the ministers to return to their duty posts. You know, he says the business of governance is a serious one, and he can't give in to chance. He said they will all be at their duty posts until the 29th of May, when they will then hand over to the permanent secretaries, who would begin to report to the new administration of Bola Ahmed Tinubu that will be sworn in on the 29th of May. So he's basically telling them that, well, work is not over. This Federal Executive Council meeting that was held today is the last in the life of President Muhammad Buhari's administration, but that does not mean or does not suggest that their job has ended until the 29th of May before they can call it quits.
We hear that all the 44 ministers and ministers of state were physically present. Has that always been the case, or it's strange to see a full house today, Femi?
Well, today's case is quite exceptional because after COVID, during COVID and after COVID, the whole Federal Executive Council members were unable to convene. Some of them had to join the council meeting virtually, and then some joined physically, and then it moved on to a hybrid Federal Executive Council meeting. But today's own is the first that we are seeing in a long time, because it is the last. Just like their first Federal Executive Council meeting, today's one was also very important, and they all turned up looking good. Some of them, wearing their traditional attires, just trying to make an impression also with their fashion, with their dresses, and all of that, to just ensure that, well, today's event is worth the occasion. I know they also, at the end of the day, another high point was them taking that final picture with Mr. President. They were all smiles when they went out to the garden where they had that last photograph with President Muhammad Buhari in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces before his tenure expires on the 29th of May, which is next Monday.
You know, the interesting thing, Femi, is that they cannot be judges, in their own case as to how they have performed in the past 8 years. But perhaps we can just talk more about the valedictory speeches and what they had to say about their roles and their performance in office.
Yes, indeed, they cannot be judges in their case, but some of them also believe that, well, Nigerians and indeed posterity will be kind to them when their matter is being judged in the court of public opinion. I spoke with the Federal Minister of Finance, who says that indeed being in the saddle of Minister of Finance and playing a crucial role in coordinating Nigeria's economy was indeed very challenging, because Nigeria went into 2 economic recessions and was able to bounce back. They were able to stabilize the economy. They were able to inject funds to ensure that the critical mass of the population who are living below the poverty line at least have something to put on their table. They introduced the National Social Investment Program through the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management, and some other interventions of the federal government through the CBN, that is the Anchor Borrower Program, through different ministries, just to ensure that government's policies, plans, and programs are cascaded to the ordinary Nigerians. Well, for them, they say it's a pass mark, but for Nigerians on the street, it might be otherwise, or some might be fair in their assessment of the ministers that make up President Muhammad Buhari's federal cabinet.
It took President Buhari some 6 months to appoint these cabinet members. You recall that Garba Shehu later on blamed it on the handover arrangement from the Jonathan administration. Do you say that the incoming administration should have learnt its lessons, and we should expect, a cabinet nomination earlier than this one?
Well, President Muhammad Buhari, well, to his credit, has signed the Executive Order 14 that makes programs for the transition from one administration to the other. This has been gazetted and also institutionalized by creating a legal framework to ensure that there's a smooth transition. What was lacking at that time was that legal framework. That's why it was very difficult for President Muhammad Buhari to kickstart his cabinet or his administration from the word go, because the handover notes were scanty, and he had to start from scratch in reading through the papers, knowing where the previous administration stopped, and knowing from which point he would pick up the baton and continue the race. But you know, all of that has been simplified with the signing of that executive order. So we expect the incoming administration to hit the ground running. We do not know how long we will have to wait before ministers are announced, but we know that the National Assembly will first have to be inaugurated. That is after a presidential proclamation that will be done by Bola Ahmed Tinubu, who will be president at that time. After that proclamation, the National Assembly will be inaugurated, and then we expect that after a few sittings and the National Assembly itself stabilizes, the list of ministers that will form ministers designate will be sent to the National Assembly for confirmation before they are now sworn in as substantive ministers.
In short, you're saying that the incoming administration has no excuses. We'll see how it all plays out. Senior correspondent Femi Akonde live for us in Abuja. Good to see you, Femi.